Great. Well, thank you everyone for joining us for the afternoon session today. So we have two different presentations. So the first one, we're joined by Keri, who will be doing a presentation on living lightly locally, smarter and stronger through citizen science. And we are also joined by Mik AIDT, find your role in the climate revolution. So we'll have about 25 minutes for each presentation with the questions and with time for questions and answers. If you have any questions, if you're online, please put them in the chat and we'll come to them afterwards. And if you are in person, we'll be able to, or Kira will be able to help facilitate that. So thank you. So now I'll pass over to Keri. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Rhiannon, and to everyone else who's joined us today. I'll be sharing with you about a new project I'm involved with, as Rhiannon said, called Living Lightly Locally, Smarter and Stronger Through Citizen Science. But first, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm joining you today from the beautiful lands of the Peramung and Garda people in the Adelaide Hills. I'd like to extend my respect to elders past, present and emerging, as well as to any First Nations people that might be joining us today. And as we think about what it means to live lightly locally, I acknowledge the role played by First Nations people in caring for country since time immemorial. And I'd also like to invite us all to reflect on our own roles in contributing to processes of decolonisation where we are. The picture is my view to the right today, so I'm really lucky to have. And this is the amazing team that I have the pleasure of working with on this project. You'll notice that James and I have the same name and that my name is different from the name on the conference program. This is because we got married last year in the middle of a global pandemic. The name listed on the program was CHIVERALLS and my husband's name was Ward, but we decided that rather than following patriarchal traditions, we'd both change our names by adding some hope to his, because that's the direction that we both want to head in, hopeward. And that's what this project's all about, active hope. I should also mention that James is also with us today. I don't know if you want to wave.
Hi.
He'll be posting some information and links in the chat for you during the session as well. And I'd also like to acknowledge our wonderful project partners and contacts without whom this project wouldn't be possible. So that's Green Adelaide, Hills and Florio Landscape Board, City of Burnside Council, Mount Barker District Council, and the Australian Red Cross Climate Ready Communities Program. And I also need to acknowledge that this project has received grant funding from the Australian federal government through the Citizen Science Grants Round, which is really exciting and happened a little earlier this year and has granted us some funding for a little under 3 years. It's very welcome and exciting. So a little bit about the project background. This project's been inspired by several different pre-existing programs and projects that you can see here, and that James will give you a bit more information about through the chat. So the living part of the project title, Living Lightly, is locally, is a nod to the Living Smart program I've been engaged with facilitating for the last few years. For those who aren't familiar with it already, it's an 8-week adult education program informed by adult learning theory, designed to inspire small groups of participants to set and share SMART goals for change, which is what the smarter part of the project subtitle refers to, across 10 different sustainability or wellbeing related topics, which vary in terms of content, order and delivery. But in the full courses include information organised under categories including healthy home, healthy you, transport, waste, energy, water, gardening for biodiversity and food, community, and living simply, which usually also covers some of the issues with our current economy and the need for a wellbeing economy we've been discussing during this conference. The program was first delivered as a pilot in 2003 in Western Australia to test the impact of goal setting and other frameworks in community environmental education programs. This was evaluated in a PhD by Lucy Sheehy in 2005. But after demonstrating success, the program's been delivered to numerous groups across Australia, overseen until recently by Living Smart Inc., but since it's disbanding, it's been delivered in South Australia by Green Adelaide since 2017, usually in partnership with local governments and other community organisations. And there are new shorter options for course delivery now that have also emerged, including tasters on 2 to 3 topics or short courses, ranging from a few hours to a few days. The lightly part of Living Lightly is inspired by the Treading Lightly 2019 documentary by Nick Grolman. And if you haven't seen it, you can check it out on Vimeo and rent it for $1. It's $1 well spent. Treading Lightly follows Adelaide couple Nick and Jamie's journey to a 2-tonne carbon lifestyle over the course of a year, including their efforts to track the impacts of the changes they're implementing and a relatively honest account of the challenges, successes, and emotional ups and downs of their journey. Similarly, one of the ideas behind the International 52 Climate Actions Project was that people could take one action per week over the course of a year, starting with a carbon audit or ecological footprint assessment, and repeat the assessment at the end of the year to track the impact of their actions, theoretically repeating this process indefinitely. The Australian Red Cross Climate Ready Communities program is an essay-based program that includes short course offerings for small groups from a few hours to a few days, designed to create climate ready champions to activate their local communities to become climate ready. The programs involve tours to local sites and businesses taking action for climate readiness, along with a host of other resources and events, including a great Climate Ready Communities Guide to Get Started, published in 2017, that includes tips on understanding local impacts, mapping community connections, and having conversations about climate readiness. Living Lightly Locally, our project, is also inspired by Shift Australia, a program established in 2018, which is designed to move people beyond a focus on individual behaviour change and support them to take collective action to create broader system level change across issues that they list on their website as climate change, refugee rights, gender equality, disability rights, public health, Aboriginal self-determination, and more. Shift aims to move people from a focus on individual behaviour change to community and systems activism using the 4 spheres of power they refer to as your vote, voice, dollars, and time to shift power back to citizens. The program initially aimed at facilitating small groups of around 7 to 10 people, committing to take 1 action per day over just 5 days a week for a month, but it's now also offering mini shifts over the course of 3 days. So you can see all of these influences coming together in the design of our project concept. Living Lightly Locally will start with a pilot of up to 30 participants in our 2 local council project partner regions, City of Burnside and Mount Barker District Council. And the programs will commence with introducing people to citizen science concepts and potential approaches to tracking and spreading change in their communities, including a conventional ecological footprint assessment or similar, alongside some less conventional approaches, which I'll describe later on. They will then set and share goals, extending actions out from individual and household behaviour change to community and systems activism, supported by locally relevant resources, the locally part of the title, and expertise, and documenting and sharing their journey of change over the course of the year. And they'll then repeat the initial audits and review the visioning exercise at the end of the program, reflect on and be encouraged to continue their journey as local legends in their community, and also become facilitators of living lightly locally, hopefully with some additional funding. In terms of the timeline for the project, the first pilots will take place next year. The program will then be refined and we'll repeat the pilots the following year, culminating at the end of the project in the facilitator training. I'm going to talk a little bit now about the theoretical background behind the project. So the UN's 6th Global Environment Outlook report highlighted the tendency for transition scenarios to be dominated by top-down model-based approaches. While traditional citizen science projects have tended to focus on crowdsourcing vast sets of largely quantitative data, you can see there the top citizen science communities in 2018, with Zooniverse attracting 1.7 million users. This project is focused rather on employing more qualitative research methods to generate small but richer data sets that bring local narratives of change at the grassroots level to the fore. For example, anthropological contributions in this space, like Sarah Pink's Situating Everyday Life, have effectively employed ethnographic research methodologies, including vignettes involving a relatively small number of people, to illustrate the complexities associated with change in the spaces of everyday life and activism. The theoretical background for the project is also informed by Marilyn Straffen's critiques of the rise of audit cultures in research and education institutions and Ritz's McDonaldization theory. So for those who aren't familiar with it, Ritze extended Weber's discussions of how scientific rationality produced bureaucracy to argue that the characteristics of fast food chains, most notably calculability, efficiency, predictability, standardization, and control, but also including compartmentalized knowledge, hierarchical roles, perceptions of merit-based advancement through hierarchical systems, and an emphasis on the rule of law, had proliferated through modern institutions to such an extent that one could argue for the McDonaldization of society. Such trends have seen a rise of countervailing movements like the movement for slow research and slow scholarship, reflecting the values of the slow food and sit slow movements in academia, with an emphasis on feminist scholarship and an ethic of care and quality over productivity and quantity. And you can see this approach reflected in our project timeline with the 2-year-long pilots designed to help refine the program before it can be delivered more widely, and also to provide time and space for participants to engage with and reflect on their journey. However, we're aware this presents a challenge for us in terms of recruitment, as a lot of the other programs have been heading very much in the opposite direction and delivering short, sharp and shiny courses as a common response to the commitment fatigue accompanying the global coronavirus pandemic. So we welcome any advice that you might have for us here. It's definitely one of our major challenges. More recently, Ritz's McDonaldization thesis has been referred to in a 2020 critique headline, "Would you like some fries with your ecosystem services?" and previously referenced in relation to concepts of sustainability and McJustice. At a time when leaders and governments, not least our own, are being criticised for inaction on climate change in the face of the release of the IPCC's 6th assessment report and COP26 in Glasgow, a proliferation of apps, websites and programs exist, emphasising individual responsibility and inspiring people to take action into their own hands. Such apps and programs usually commence with an audit of some kind, varying from an audit of your carbon, water, energy or ecological footprint to even just a few short questions, then create some kind of result or measure and recommend the best actions for people to take to reduce their impact. While this might seem encouraging, there are many parallels here with the characteristics of McDonaldization and sustainability, with an emphasis on calculability, efficiency, predictability, standardization and control evident in many programs aiming at mass impact. While the desire for mass impact is laudable at this time, it's also important to be aware of the risks that accompany such approaches. For example, information can often be contradictory and lack context or relatability, with a disconnect between available data and informed community action on the ground. There's a risk of replicating the neoliberal focus on individual action and responsibility, with reductionist and prescriptive approaches that provide narrow options for action that are measurable at a large scale. And this may come at the expense of understandings of the trade-offs and impacts of actions across different interconnected arenas of life, and the complexities associated with capturing impacts over the long term, the importance of relational perspectives and the applicability or not of actions in different local contexts, the wisdom of lived experience and place-based knowledge, the importance of self-determination of meaningful actions, and the need to focus on cultural and system change. It's arguably more difficult to quantify the impact of actions aimed at smashing the patriarchy or decolonizing, for example, though shifts are attempting to do this to some extent in tracking the actions taken by their participants. So we've kept these issues in mind as we've designed the methodology for the project. While we do intend for participants to begin with a conventional ecological and/or other footprint assessment or audit, maybe several, we'll also introduce the participants to the critiques and limitations of these approaches and compare their results with those captured through alternative methods. We'll also ensure these individual or household level approaches are grounded in a collective approach to local and systems change through exercises like network mapping and the collective visioning exercise I'll describe shortly. While we will encourage participants to set and share their own and review one another's goals for change using SMART goal setting theory, we'll also take a more complex approach to goal setting than is usual for a Living SMART course, extended to account for the complexities of change over the long term, informed by trans-theoretical behaviour change theory and the need to attend to local contexts, relationships and circumstances. The program will apply some aspects of community-based social marketing theory or CBSM, but with consideration of the critiques of this theory and an acknowledgement that this theory too is historically predicated on large data sets, prescriptive approaches, and the promotion of limited options for action. Rather, we'll seek to work with our participants to co-create and co-design activities to create social diffusion and systems change in their chosen areas of action, extending their goals out from the level of individual and household behaviour change to community and systems activism. We'll encourage participants to reflect on and share the challenges, successes and complexities of their ongoing journeys and stories of change, and compare and contrast these narratives with the repeat, audit and reflection on the collective visioning at the end of the program. So I'll just describe that exercise a little now. I really wish we'd submitted it as a workshop for this conference, but hopefully next year, or there'll be other opportunities. So in the opening session of this conference, Bob Costanza called for clearer visions of the future that we're trying to create. Living Lightly Locally will commence each intake with a carefully crafted collective visioning exercise that we called Envisaging Ecotopia when James and I initially designed it for a workshop intended to be delivered at Rainbow Serpent Festival a few years ago, but this was cancelled due to the fires. After first being introduced to some of the boundaries and constraints that we're working within, participants are guided through an adapted version of the transition visualization described by Rob Hopkins on the Transition Culture website when Starhawk visited Totnes, the heart of the transition movement, and led a visioning exercise there. But our visioning will begin with participants imagining that they're walking down the main street or focal point of their local region at some unspecified time in the future where we've successfully navigated energy descent and are living in a state of well-being within the boundaries and constraints outlined. The visioning process carefully guides participants through the different topics covered in the course through a series of very gentle questions that encourage them to notice and focus their attention on different aspects of this vision and invite them to consider their role in bringing the vision to life. When they return to the present, their ideas and experiences will be captured in an artwork created by a local artist, in our case for the first two pilots. This will be Simon Kneebone. This is an example of a similar type of illustration he created for SA Urban Food Network a few years ago. This collective vision will then be gifted to participants to refer to, reflect on, and inspire their journey in the program and beyond. We're excited to explore the potential of such exercises to create more holistic and locally relevant approaches in this space, as well as help chart new courses into the future. As the famous baseball philosopher Yogi Berra is often reported to have said, if you don't know where you're going, you'll end up someplace else. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Keri. Yeah, there's so much to sort of digest there, especially with those graphics and everything that you've shared. So if anyone has any questions, please do put them in the chat or have a little think. And if you're in the room, Kira could potentially pass you the microphone. Oh, Kira's walking over. Mik also has one, so we'll just see. Kira, were you passing the microphone or no? Mik, would you like to ask a question?
Yeah, so great vision and fantastic, lots of links there and everything. Thank you so much, very inspiring. My question is, it seems like a lot of this is things that have to do with things you learn and then you do things like gardening, growing food and so on. But what are your thoughts about physical room, like buildings, such as, do we need to have like community houses that can sort of hold all this together? Do we need to, for instance, to go to our council and say, can you give us a place where we can do this? So a little bit more about the physical part of this story.
Yeah, so I always like that expression, use what you have, do what you can where you are. I've butchered it there, but you know, it's all about encouraging people to make the changes that they can. I think, you know, when it comes to climate change and the other issues of crisis that we're facing, the best action someone can take is the action they can take right now. So that's why we are really emphasizing the ability of our participants to like self-determine all their actions going forward, and that we'll work with them to help them identify the places that they can best work towards action. Yeah, absolutely. If that's something that's being identified by our participants as something that they want, that would be part of the activating for systems change, whether that's working towards establishing community gardens or other spaces of support that they want. The great thing is that we have the support of the local government people that you saw there as our sponsors, and they're really interested in this program as well and in helping support the participants. So it's a great start. Yeah. I hope that answered your question. Thanks.
Okay, and to follow on from that, Eileen also had a question.
Yes, I was just wondering, you'd mentioned partnerships, forming partnerships to run the pilot program. Would eco-villages be a suitable partner for you? There's an eco-village up
Yeah.
Sydney, just north of Sydney, that I'm involved with, and we've got a small education center which is slowly growing, and it just dawned on me maybe.
Absolutely. Yeah, any kind of community group. I mean, anybody who's interested in being part of local systems change are the sort of people that we want to target. Just with these first two pilots, two lots of pilots, we've promised them to our project partners. So we'll be working with those councils in the first instance. And we're taking a slow approach to it, as you heard. We really want to develop the best program that we possibly can and receive a lot of feedback from those first groups. But then, yeah, we want to run that facilitator training, and that'll be open to anybody in Australia. We want to train people to be able to deliver the program where they're at,
Yes.
Whether that's in an eco-village or anywhere. Yeah, we're really excited about the potential, and yeah, definitely invite you to reach out if you think there are people there that would be interested. Yeah.
Would that be in 2 years' time when you finish the pilot, or could it be, could we form part of the pilot? I know you said you're focusing on your partners, but
yeah, I mean, I definitely encourage you to reach out, because even if it couldn't be until the facilitator training, like we still have to develop the facilitator training. And so, of course, communication from groups that we know are interested and would like to be doing it would be really, really good really early on, because then we can help make sure we design that to meet your needs. And we can also work together to try and secure funding for you to be able to roll that out in your area. So yeah, definitely get in touch. It'd be great. Just love to hear from you.
Email you, Keri, or how?
Yeah, just yeah.
There you go. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks.
We'll just give Eileen a second to write that down. Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you so much, Keri, for sharing. Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing how this rolls out, and yeah, it's something that I'm really interested in as well. So, which is why I chose to chair this session. So yeah, thank you so much. If everyone wants to give a Zoom round of applause. And
thanks for the opportunity. I'll just work out how to stop sharing. Oh, there it is.
Perfect. Thank you. And so now we will, we have our second presentation for this session. So it's Mik AIDT, Find Your Role in the Climate Revolution. Pass over. Thank you so much, Mik.
Thank you. And as you can hear, it's a big word to take in your mouth, the word revolution. And I'm coming from a different place, I guess, than Keri. I was taught 30 years ago when I attended journalism school that journalists are very, very different. They're sort of anti-academic, because our job is to take all these long reports that come out of the universities and chuck them down to just a headline and a subtitle and a good picture, so people can actually understand what it is that these academics are saying. So you'll find probably that my presentation is maybe different in the way that I present than Keri. However, I really think that we are very much on the same page, and we are speaking the same language in some way, and having the same mission. But I'll do it with a lot less links and reports, and more tell my own story and see where that takes us. So I'll just do a screen sharing first. Let's see if I can get it over to. I took the title, Find Your Role in the Climate Revolution. Can you see this on your screen now? Yep. From a podcast that I produced some months ago, which actually I'm hoping I'll be doing more of under this title, The Climate Revolution. And there are two big words that I keep coming back to, and I will try and round up a conclusion on this in about 10-15 minutes, and then we'll have talk for discussing it after that. Number one is that, folks, climate change climate emergency is such a big thing, and we have seen now what's happening up in Glasgow. The politicians cannot figure it out for us. They're not on a good trajectory at the moment. We need to get together and work together. And unless we really figure out how to do that properly, we're not going to solve this problem in time. That's what number one word that I'm going to come back to all the time is: we need to do this together. And the second one is maybe because I'm a journalist, that I talk a lot about story and how we change the story. Because the thing is, where I'm coming from, if we manage to change the story, the big story that's out there in society, that is step number one to create what I call a climate revolution. And it starts with changing the story, coming together, and then things begin to happen. But I'll tell you a little bit more about it. Just a quick overview. So when I talk about the story, what am I talking about? Well, when we talk about climate, there are so many stories happening at the moment at the same time. Just to give you some pictures of climate activism. I don't know if you remember this picture. This was how things started for Greta Thunberg up in Sweden 3 years ago, sitting there alone in front of the Swedish parliament. And 2 years later, let me see if, hang on. 2 years later, this is what it looked like in Geelong, where I'm coming from, or calling in from today. Thanks alone to this Swedish girl who sat in front of the parliament all alone. A lot of mobilization around the world. There were 4 million people on the streets that day calling on their politicians to change. However, nothing really happened inside that building, or did it? That's the question. Did we change the story yet? Because this was what it looked like when there was call for another school strike just a couple of weeks ago, which was sort of sad in a way, but I'll come back to that. So when we talk about stories, there's the news stories, and I think everyone is, when we watch the news, beginning to see that, oh, climate change is moving in on us. There is more and more serious bushfires and droughts, and we hear more and more bad stories out there about what's happening to the world. We have the science supporting that. And the story about the science is so strong now that it's as if we have finally won over all the climate denial, which is about, it's not really happening, and so on. We see all the graphs going in the wrong direction, and they don't seem to stop. And it's even becoming like a more mainstream fact that the temperature is rising, and we're beginning to see it on our public broadcasters such as the ABC. It's taken them a long time, but it is happening now. So the science is now settled, but there's a lot more stories than that. So for instance, there's those people who say, well, too bad, it's already too late. Collapse is inevitable. So there's that sort of negative, little bit doom and gloom story out there. There's another story which is, no, we can still fix it. There's still time. We can come in with all our different innovation and technology, and we can do stuff. And there's the whole protesting story, which is about we need to become more radicalized in our way of protesting, because otherwise nothing's going to happen. And so on and so on. There's so many stories. And they all create different feelings and emotions inside us, in a way. Just to elaborate a second on the green tech story, which is very much, of course, about renewable energy and about the fact that renewable energy gets cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. And one day we will have free energy if we continue out that tangent, which I hope we will, of course. But it's also the story about a lot of good things, such as that we live more healthy lives, there's more safety, our houses get more comfortable, and there's a lot of new jobs in this business. So these are some of the examples of the positive story that's out there. So I want to just take a break from the screen sharing here and hear from you, and just find out in this room where we are, up in the beehive, including who we are digitally gathered around in Australia, which camp are you in? So I've just given you a caricature here of two camps. There's the optimism camp, and there's that fear, no, it's not looking good, I'm really worried, I can't sleep at night, that sort of camp. Which, if you were to choose between them, and to be fair, I should say we can also say there's a third camp, which are those in-betweeners who are not really sure or who are in between. But I'd love to see a show of hands, if you don't mind. I have mine on gallery view now, just to get an idea. So let's see some showing of hands, and you can, if you don't want to show your face, you can do a digital hand. Down in the reactions button, you can put a digital hand up. Let's see first some hands. Who are in the optimism camp? Who believe that we?
Am I on or not? Hello? I am, sorry. I'm sorry, Mik. In terms of your stories, I reject your simpleness of those stories. So I'm not ready to put my hand up for any of them.
All right, that's fine, because that is what I'm about. That's what journalism is about. It is about simplifying stories. So I take that on notice, and let's talk about it in 5-10 minutes when I've just taken the second part here. The rest of you, if you don't reject to my proposition here, let's see some hands on who are the optimists among us. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 5.5. Okay. Do we have some pessimists or some people who are worried and fearful? And half, yeah. 2 halves. It seems like we have more optimists than, should I call them pessimists or fearful among us? So that's it was just to take the temperature.
Can I add a third category of angry, hopeful?
I like that. Yes.
Not fear, it's more like rage, but towards the optimism side. So
yeah, I love that. That's great. I'm sorry for being really fast with this, but we're so compressed with time. There ought to be 6 different groups, of course. But I'll just, for now, we'll just say that we've done a little survey here, and it did show, or it gave a direction of that we have more optimism than pessimism in the room at this time. So that's good to know. And I can tell you, it's very different when you speak to different groups of people. The facts are, let's see if I can switch forward here, that when you talk with young people, the polls are showing that the youth is a lot more worried than the older generations. And there was a poll just here in September that showed that out of 10,000 young people asked in many different countries, 6 out of 10 are either very or extremely worried about what's going on with the climate. And that's a very real thing that I think politicians are completely ignoring and overlooking, which is, what does this do to our young people who are growing up right now? Are we creating an entire generation that is coming into the world with this sort of start in life? And I say that because I think we need to change that story very, very quickly. And I speak about that because I'm also a dad, and these are my 3 kids, 12 years, 14 years, and 16 years. And in a way, when I talk about the need to change the story, I speak for them. I speak as a dad who feel a responsibility about this. And I try to change the story every day when we sit around the dinner table about these things. That's what I see as my plight as a dad. And I don't understand that there aren't many more dads out there who feel that way. But I'll come back to that again. What I did 5 years ago, together with a little handful of climate activists here in Australia, was that we said, we need to step up the rhetorics around this. We need to talk about the climate emergency, which was something everybody said, no, you cannot talk about an emergency. People will get scared, etc., etc. And we even further than that said we can declare a climate emergency and spread that idea around the world, first to America, and then it went to UK. And now, 5 years later, we have more than 2,000 councils that have declared a climate emergency in 36 different countries. On top of that, we have 15 national governments that have done it. We have the United Nations that are calling on all nations to do it. So this was something that started with 5 people on a Skype conversation, where now we see that whole movement of at least how we change the language around this and how we step up, because we say we've declared something. All right, then we better follow up and do some action. This is a graph that shows when the declarations were made. As you can see, the peak was sort of in the middle of 2019, but even today it's still happening. I'm getting email on a daily basis almost from councils around the planet that are saying, we are just about to do this, is there any special requirement, etc., etc. And now we are covering, when I say we, this campaign is covering areas in the world where more than 1 billion people live. So we're talking about like a seventh of humanity that live in a place that has declared a climate emergency. And why that matters, just to say an example, is that in the UK, before that there was this talk about declaring a climate emergency, everyone was thinking we are going to get down to zero by 2050. That's the red graph there. If you take the average, getting down to zero in 2050, because of the climate emergency declaration, many of these councils have now a 2030 target, and that's the blue. And if you make the difference in terms of carbon emissions between the blue and the red, that accounts up, just for the UK alone, to 2.5 billion tons that we have saved the atmosphere from, or for not getting out into the atmosphere. So that's what we're talking about. This started with just changing the language. We said, we must change the story. We cannot talk about climate change. It's an emergency, and we can declare an emergency. So out of that, maybe we have already saved the planet from billions of tons of carbon going into the atmosphere simply by changing the language. That's where I'm coming from when I now say we can change the language even better and more. We can take a word like revolution in our mouth and say this is what's required. Because revolutions, the way we've heard about them in history, typically involve a lot of people. We saw, for instance, also in the Arab, it wasn't called the Arab Revolution, it was called the Arab Spring. But still, it was 1 million people, I think it was, that gathered at Tahrir Square, and things began to happen. Where I'm coming from is, I don't think that the climate revolution looks like this. I think it looks a lot more like this. I'll just keep quiet for a second so you can get to read the little story here. Where the point is that it's all the little acts that each of us can do that become a revolution when they all come together. And I have taken inspiration from Greta in one sense, but in particular, and that is the courage that she showed and the simplicity that she showed with her little sign there. Super simple to understand for everyone what's going on here. So I have, together with two friends, created a series of signs, and that's, in my understanding, the adult's version of being a Greta, taking that step to say, I may not be comfortable going out in the world and starting to talk to strangers, but yet Greta did it. Okay, I can do it too. I can sit in front of my city hall with my sign and start talking to people about the adult's version of this story, which is that we actually know what to do. It's not that hard to be starting at least that conversation about what we need to do. So these posters that we put together, the idea there is to say, the story must be told in just 7 points. That's the max, that's the dogma rule. 7 points is max for any sector in society. So we create posters. We've started off with the media. We created one for citizens, one for trade unions. We're doing now one for businesses, one for politicians, etc. And if you just take a quick glance of the headlines, you can see that these are big headlines in a way. They're not about, go and buy some solar panels or use your bike more or something. They're a little bit bigger than that. And each of these stories could be, folded out and become a whole book or a whole film or a whole podcast and so on. So there's a lot of, you could say, stories inside each of these points. But the point number 6 is important, that we talk about a climate revolution. And then, of course, number 1 and number 7, we think are so important that we have those on all the posters, right? So I'm just going to be quick now and not go too much into the details of this, but you're welcome. You can go to the website where we'll put more posters as we publish them. It's called allforclimate.today. We also have other posters that we've done where we try again to simplify the story so it's easily told. For instance, the story about, do you know what the world would look like at a 6-degree warming? Very, very few people realize that. That 6 degrees actually means that the only survivors will be a bit of bacteria and fungi. No humans live on a 6-degree warmed planet. But what they also don't realize is that the tipping points that take us to 6 degrees start already at 3 degrees. And that's where it gets serious. So we have in Denmark been handing out posters in front of the equivalent to the ABC. And wow, it didn't take more than a week. Then we saw the poster discussed in the news program, national TV, beginning to talk about this stuff. So again, it shows that just a few people can actually influence or have an influence in this if we are bold enough in a way and say, yep, we can do something, or take that extra step out of the comfort zone. The UN is telling us, and this is back 3 years ago that they told us, we need rapid, far-reaching and unprecedented changes in all aspects of society. And that's what we need to keep reminding ourselves. Sir David King, who was the former chief scientific advisor, has said, we just have these 3 to 4 years now to determine the future of humanity. That's as serious as it is. So what I'm saying is, let's get started. Find your role. Are you a resistor, as we heard one is in our group here, or are you a networker? Or are you like me? I've declared myself to be a communicator. That's what I do. I do podcasts and communication. Or are you a builder, a gardener? Are you an investigator, a nurturer, and so on? I've done a podcast to kick it off, the third in a series of episodes that I mentioned. You can find it on this website, climatesafety.info/climate-revolution3, because it's the third, and more coming. That one, I think, could inspire more people to what we're talking about here. So that's the talk. There's a lot of, I think, thinking out of the box needed. And when we talk about revolution, there's a lot of words that start with the same RE when you look at it. And that, to me, is all what's needed inside a climate revolution. All these different things that we need to do. Think out of the box and let's get to work. But never forget, we can't do it alone. We need to do it together. We can do a lot as one person, for sure, once we've found our role. But never forget, the most important word in today's world, as someone from the UN has said once, is together. So now that's up for debate. And I know if I have provoked anybody, that's fine, because that's what it's in a way also about. It's about not to fall asleep, but to have a lively debate about how we take this further. So I'll stop sharing. I will, I think I have at the end, yep. If you want to discuss it with me, because we have so little time now, please contact me on this email address and we can have another Zoom or something else, because I am all the time willing to dig deeper into these discussions, and inspiration just as well from all sorts of corners. And this is the blog and the website and all the podcast that we do. We've just celebrated our 8th year anniversary, and we've done 487 hours of sustainable hours out there. This week we had Will Steffen, who is a scientist, and we had Simon Holmes Accord, who is a bit of, we think, a revolutionary in Australian politics, and they are definitely worth listening to. So I can recommend that. Yep. Over to you, Rhiannon.
Well, thank you so much, Mik. Yeah, feeling, if I wasn't feeling optimistic before, that energy and passion, I'm feeling pretty optimistic now. Thank you. I would love, if anyone has questions, please put them in the chat. I would be interested in, so reframing it as a climate revolution. I guess revolution can have negative connotations, mostly for the existing, people that are trying to uphold the existing system. I guess, how do you talk about like framing that in a positive way that people will
it's a good question, and I'm not sure if it's going to work. Maybe it's just me with a crazy idea. But what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to provoke a little bit, because I want to have a debate about, are we doing well enough? Are we good enough? Are we ambitious enough? That's what I did 5 years ago. 5 years ago, when I talked about climate emergency, everyone was shaking their head. And you know what? We use our podcast all the time to test these things. So instead of using focus groups, we talk about it with our guests. Back 5 years ago, we had 8 different distinguished guests, people who were like former premiers and so on, with whom we talked about the climate emergency and whether they believed that we should use that word or not. And similarly today, I talked with Simon Holmes and with Will Steffen about the same thing. We talked with them about, do you think it's a good word? Can we use that word? And what would happen if we started talking about what you're doing, Simon, as a climate revolution? So I'm testing it with the guests all the time, and I'm still not 100% sure, because yes, it sounds like, you know, we associate revolution with violence, we associate it with something left wing taking over a right wing government, or these kind of things. However, we also talk about the green and the non-polluting industrial revolution as no problem. We talk about the food revolution. There's a lot of revolutions, if you notice, that we have no problem with using the word. So I'm thinking by combining it with climate, maybe that sort of puts it in another frame, and we could sort of take ownership on it. Sometimes it's a question of, if enough people do it, then it's going. We see it with the climate emergency. That was declared word of the year by the Oxford dictionaries in 2019, which was like, yes, we did it. It was like getting the Oscars of words. And maybe can we get, you know, climate revolution to be the next words that's declared word of the year next year? Hey,
let's do it. I'm up for it. Does anyone else have any questions?
You can just talk, yeah. Yep.
G'day, my name's Liz. Hey, Mike, that's great. I really am so impressed with your enthusiasm, and I look forward to the climate revolution. I'm also checking in where we can get a sign from. They look pretty groovy. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah. So when published, because we've only published the media one, the blue one you see behind me, that one is available in a high resolution, so PDF. You can print it in A0 or A1 format if you want. It's not that expensive, actually. I was surprised how cheap it is. I did mine as core flute. And the idea is that they are out there, you know, it's open source. Anyone can do with them what they want. They can even change them if they want. The next ones, we have a plan that we want to publish once a month. So the next one coming here on the big shopping Black Friday, I think it's called, in end of November, we'll publish the Citizen one, which is of course not about Black Friday, but the opposite. But that's the day we'll be handing out that poster in front of supermarkets. And we'll do it in 3 countries. So in Denmark, in Australia, and in France. But the idea is, and that's the same, you could say, thinking as we had 5 years ago with the climate emergency declaration, which is that we handed over, you know, you can do with this what you want. That's been the strength of that other movement. Why it became so big was that we didn't have like an organization that had ownership of it. It was an idea that we sent out, and it just went like when Extinction Rebellion and Greta Thunberg and others took it up, that's when it became really big. They wouldn't have done that if we had our logos all over the place on it, that we are an organization running this and so on. No, it was just an idea. And we're hoping with time that this is what could happen with the posters as well. Because the next thing I have done personally is that I've made posters where the 5 points in the middle, so the 0.1 and 0.7 are the same on all posters. So I left the 0.1 but the 5 in the middle, I've left them open. And then when I go out and give a talk, I hand out these posters with 5 open points and say, this is homework for you. What's gonna be? If you're gonna send out the message to the youth or the message to your counselors, what's these 5 points gonna be for them?
Wonderful. Yeah. Fantastic that you've made them so widely available and that people can just run with it. Yeah, thank you. Does anyone, so it's sort of the end of the session now, but any last questions? Otherwise we'll wrap up. No. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Yeah, looking forward to checking out that website. If everyone can please give a round of applause for both speakers today. So there's a 10-minute break before the next session, which starts at 4:30. And yeah, we look forward to, oh, Vicky, do you have your hand up? No, just a thumbs up. Excellent. All right, well, thank you so much, everyone. We'll see you at the next session.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.